I have full confidence in Catherine and William. Their judgment is sound, their loyalty unquestionable.
The monarchy did not tremble because of a speech, a scandal, or a shouting match behind palace doors. It trembled because of one decision, delivered in silence, inside a private room where King Charles finally drew a line no one expected him to draw. Camilla was frozen out. William was named the inheritor of the Queen's estate. And in that single moment, the emotional balance of the crown changed forever. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles felt the weight before anyone spoke. The file rested in front of him like a final test, and he knew the words inside it would wound the woman beside him while lifting the son who would one day wear the crown. The Queen's estate meant more than homes, jewels, and private papers. It meant the late monarch's personal legacy, her memory, her wishes, and the quiet power she left behind. That was why this mattered. It was not about property alone, it was about trust. Charles read the final paragraph twice. His eyes stayed on the page as the estate order named William as primary inheritor and future steward of the Queen's private legacy. An estate order, in plain words, is a formal instruction about who controls and protects royal property, assets, and legacy decisions. This one did something sharper. It removed Camilla from control and placed authority in William's hands. Camilla entered expecting a discussion. She expected concern, resistance, perhaps compromise. Instead, Charles gave her stillness. He did not soften the words. He did not invite debate. The Queen consort looked from the king to the file, and her face changed as she understood the decision had passed beyond persuasion. Anger might have been easier. Silence made it colder. Silence told her she was not being asked. William stood with careful restraint, aware the moment could make him look victorious when he felt no triumph. The prince knew his grandmother's name carried weight. He also knew Camilla would see his inheritance as rejection, not only of her influence, but of her place near Charles. That was the pain. One person gained duty. One person lost access. One man chose monarchy over comfort. A senior courtier stepped back and closed the door. The soft click landed harder than any public statement. In that sound, family disagreement became royal rupture. Then came the shock. The file did not only speak about inheritance, it carried a message about trust, and before anyone could understand why Charles had taken such a severe step, the palace had to face the deeper question. What did Camilla, William, and the king each stand to lose? This was never only about land, jewels, papers, or palace control. It was about people who had spent years smiling in public while carrying private wounds no balcony appearance could erase. Charles saw duty closing in. Camilla saw rejection. William saw his grandmother's memory being placed into his hands. And between them stood an estate that suddenly became the battlefield for every unresolved pain inside the royal family. Charles carried the pain like a secret he could no longer hide. He had defended Camilla through storms, whispers, and years of public judgment, but now the king faced a duty that sat above affection. Constitutional duty, in simple terms, means the monarch's responsibility to protect the crown, its future, and its trusted institutions before personal feelings. That was why this choice cut deeply. He was not only deciding who touched estate papers, he was deciding whose influence could shape the Queen's memory. Camilla gripped the edge of her chair until her fingers tightened. She looked at Charles as if waiting for the man who had once stood beside her to return. But the king did not reach for comfort. He stayed controlled, almost painfully calm. That calm told her the marriage had met the monarchy, and the monarchy had won. The Queen consort understood the insult beneath the formality. She was not being pushed from his life. She was being pushed from the legacy he believed belonged beyond her reach. William waited outside the room with his hand near the door, choosing every word before he entered. The prince knew success could look cruel in that moment. He knew hesitation could look weak. The estate did not simply empower him. It tied him to the Queen's values, her old discipline, her long view of service, and the quiet promise that her private legacy would not become another arena for palace influence. A private aide noticed the smallest betrayal of feeling. When William's name was spoken, Charles looked down instead of toward Camilla. That single movement said what no statement could safely say. Freezing her out was not symbolic. It changed access, ceremonial precedence, private authority, and influence over future estate decisions. Ceremonial precedence means the order of status and importance at royal events, And losing influence there meant losing more than paperwork. It meant losing position. The room understood the triangle now. Charles was wounded by duty. Camilla was wounded by rejection. William was burdened by inheritance. But the reason for such a drastic choice did not begin with the signed order. It began earlier, in a moment everyone tried to bury, a moment at Windsor that turned quiet tension into the point of no return. Every royal crisis has a hidden beginning. Not the announcement the world hears, not the headline that explodes across screens, but the private moment when someone says one sentence too many. For this crisis, that moment came at a Windsor dinner, where Camilla made a quiet remark about the Queen's estate. William stopped eating, and Charles understood that a boundary had been crossed. That dinner followed a family memorial gathering, when emotions were already raw and every word carried extra weight. Camilla sat close to Charles, careful but confident, while William kept his attention fixed on the conversation around the table. A private Windsor dinner, in plain words, means a closed family meal inside the royal residence at Windsor, away from public cameras and formal ceremony. This mattered because private meals often reveal what public events hide. People relax. Guards drop. Truth slips out. Camilla had long moved near royal household matters, and Charles had allowed it because he trusted her presence beside him. William had tolerated that role, but he had never fully accepted it when it came near the Queen's private legacy. The royal household means the working structure of aides, offices, schedules, and decisions that support the monarch. For William, that structure could serve the crown, but it could not be allowed to reshape his grandmother's memory. Camilla spoke softly, but the sentence landed like a warning, and she suggested that the Queen's estate should be modernized through the king's household, and the words changed the temperature of the room. To her, it sounded practical. To William, it sounded like influence reaching into sacred ground. To Charles, it sounded like a mistake he could not ignore. The Queen consort had crossed from support into control, and everyone felt it. William placed his fork down. He did not accuse her. He did not raise his voice. He looked directly at Charles, and that silence carried disappointment sharper than any argument. The prince understood what Camilla's suggestion meant. If the estate moved through the king's household, then her circle could touch decisions tied to the Queen, her papers, her honors, and her final wishes. Charles remembered that silence long after the dinner ended. Later, he asked for the estate papers to be reviewed, and aides first treated the request like routine business. Then they noticed the pattern. The king was not reviewing property, he was tracing Camilla's closeness to future authority. A handwritten note from the Queen's private circle made the truth impossible to avoid. It stressed stewardship through direct heirs, not marital influence. That dinner became the memory everyone returned to, because William remembered the sentence, Camilla remembered the silence, and Charles remembered the shame. The Windsor dinner lit the fuse, but the explosion came later, when Camilla and William finally faced each other, with Charles standing between love and legacy. The palace had seen arguments before. It had absorbed cold silences, private tears, and family fractures disguised as protocol. But this confrontation was different. There were no cameras, no carefully arranged smiles, and no aide brave enough to interrupt. Camilla wanted answers. William wanted protection for his grandmother's legacy. Charles wanted control. Instead, all three found themselves trapped inside the most painful royal reckoning in years. Charles asked the aides to leave, and the room changed before the door even closed. Camilla watched him carefully, searching for softness in his face, but the king gave her none. William stood across from her with his jaw set, knowing the estate decision had already been drafted, even if the family had not yet survived it. A private sitting room, in simple words, is a closed royal room used for personal meetings away from formal public business. That mattered because this was no longer ceremony. It was family, power, and pain stripped of every shield. Camilla turned toward Charles first. She did not ask about paperwork. She asked if she was being punished. The question hit the room because everyone knew it carried years of history inside it. The Queen consort had stood beside him through public judgment, and now she saw the man she supported placing a locked gate between her and the Queen's legacy. Charles looked at her, but the king did not rush to comfort her. His silence told William the decision was firm. His silence told Camilla it was personal. William spoke with controlled restraint, and that restraint made the words heavier. He told Camilla that the Queen's estate could not become a tool of influence. not for any office, any household, or any personal circle. The queen's estate meant her private legacy, property, instructions, records, honors, and symbolic belongings tied to her life and reign. For William, protecting it meant protecting the moral line between service and ambition. For Camilla, hearing that from the prince felt like a verdict. Charles finally said what no one could mistake. Access would be restricted. Advisory control would be removed. William's stewardship would be confirmed without further discussion. Stewardship means being trusted to guard and manage something important, not simply owning it. That single word changed everything, because it made William responsible and made Camilla separate. Camilla understood then that the decision had not been made in anger. It had been prepared. The palace had moved quietly before she even knew she was losing ground. She rose without slamming the door. She paused, looked back once, and saw Charles wounded, William steady, and power already shifted. But the confrontation was only the visible wound. Behind it stood a machinery of authority that had already decided where the queen's legacy truly belonged. In monarchy, power rarely announces itself loudly. It moves through signatures, sealed files, private counsel, and the quiet removal of access before anyone outside the palace knows a battle has begun. Charles may have carried the crown, but the estate decision revealed something colder and older than emotion. The queen's legacy had defenders, and once those defenders moved, Camilla discovered that palace doors could close without a single raised voice. Charles sat with the estate order before him, knowing every line had already been sharpened by people who understood consequence. An estate order, in plain words, is a formal instruction deciding who protects, controls, or manages royal assets and legacy matters. Private counsel means the trusted legal and palace advisors who guide the monarch before a final decision is made. This mattered because the queen's legacy was not only sentimental. It touched authority, memory, access, and the future shape of royal influence. A senior private secretary watched the king lift the pen. The secretary had seen difficult documents before, but this one made Charles pause before the final stroke. That pause revealed hesitation, not weakness. Charles knew the document would elevate William and wound Camilla. He also knew the crown could not allow confusion around the late monarch's private wishes. The king signed anyway, and the silence after the signature felt heavier than an argument. Charles removed his glasses and rubbed his brow. Then he whispered that this was not what he wanted, but what the crown required. The crown, in simple terms, means the monarchy as an institution, not just the person wearing the title. That distinction mattered because Charles the husband might have protected Camilla longer, but Charles the monarch had to protect the queen's estate first. He had chosen duty, and duty had demanded a price. William's inheritance became more than legal succession. Legal succession means the passing of rights or responsibility from one person to another under an accepted order. But this was also moral succession. The prince was being placed as the living bridge between the queen's values and the monarchy's next chapter. William gained authority, yes, but he also gained a burden that would follow every decision he made. Camilla's loss was written with careful politeness. The document restricted her from reviewing, directing, or influencing estate-linked ceremonies, honors, residences, and symbolic privileges. A sealed annex, meaning a private attachment added to the main document, confirmed that queen-linked matters had to pass through William's stewardship before wider household consultation. Camilla had not only lost access, she had lost the quiet path to influence. The ink had barely dried before the palace began to change around Camilla, not with drama, but with the brutal politeness of doors no longer opening. The first consequence did not arrive as a public disgrace. It arrived as a morning schedule. A folder was missing. A briefing was shortened. A door that had always opened now required approval. Camilla did not need a headline to understand what had happened. The palace was speaking to her, in the language it knew best: access, silence, and absence. She had not been banished, she had been reduced. Camilla noticed the change before anyone dared explain it. Her office received a revised access list before breakfast, and the names on it told a colder story than any palace statement. An access list, in simple words, is the official record of who is allowed to receive files, enter rooms, and attend private briefings. This mattered because access is power inside a royal household. Once access changes, influence changes with it, even when everyone remains polite. Her staff moved carefully around her, but careful movement only made the wound clearer. One aide lowered his voice and explained that estate-related briefings had been redirected to William's office. The royal household, meaning the offices and people who manage the monarch's daily work, had begun shifting around the new order. Camilla understood what that meant. The queen consort could still stand beside Charles in public, but the queen's private legacy was now moving away from her desk. Camilla asked for the estate folder. She did not raise her voice. She simply asked for the file that would once have arrived without delay. The aide paused, then told her gently that it had already been transferred. Her face changed before she could stop it. The Queen's estate folder, in plain terms, held the papers tied to the late monarch's private legacy, including instructions, property matters, and symbolic decisions. Losing that folder meant losing the quiet right to know first. Camilla sat alone after the aide left. The empty space on her desk became impossible to ignore. She had not been shouted down. She had not been publicly shamed. That was what made it worse. The humiliation came wrapped in courtesy. The palace did not punish her with noise. It punished her with absence. William received the same folder later that morning, marked for his personal review. The prince looked at it for a moment before opening it, aware that Camilla's loss had become his responsibility. This transfer was not symbolic. It was operational, meaning the new authority would now shape daily decisions, briefings, and future estate control. Charles made the separation sharper without saying a word. He avoided Camilla's breakfast room and chose instead to meet William privately. The king knew that choice would hurt her, but he also knew hesitation could weaken the order he had signed. The palace had made its decision, but only Charles and William could decide whether this inheritance would become a weapon or a burden. After the confrontation, after the signatures, after the closed doors, the loudest moment came in near silence. Charles and William stood alone with the weight of a woman they had both loved in different ways. The queen was gone, but her shadow remained powerful enough to reorder the family she left behind. For the first time, the estate was not about Camilla. It was about what must survive. Charles entered the private room slowly, carrying more pain than authority. William followed, but the prince did not speak at once. A private room associated with the queen's memory, in plain words, was a personal royal space, connected to her life, her papers, and her quiet habits away from public duty. That mattered because this was the first moment no aide could soften, no courtier could manage, and no official phrase could protect either man from the truth. William looked at Charles and understood that inheritance had not made him stronger. It had made him responsible. The estate legacy meant the queen's private wishes, trusted possessions, and long-term vision for the monarchy's future. For the prince, receiving it was not victory. It was a burden that would test his restraint, because every choice he made would now be measured against her name. Charles finally admitted what the decision had cost him. He told William that freezing Camilla out had wounded his private life, and the confession sounded less like a monarch speaking than a father asking his son to understand. The king did not defend the pain, he simply named it. He had chosen duty over peace, and that choice had left him standing between the woman beside him and the legacy behind him. William softened when he heard the strain in Charles's voice. The prince told him that protecting the queen's estate was not about humiliating Camilla. It was about preserving a line of trust that could not be blurred by marriage, influence, or private pressure. Camilla's exclusion carried pain, but William believed the alternative would have carried danger. If the queen's legacy became negotiable, then nothing sacred would remain safe. Charles reached into his pocket and handed William a small private key tied to the estate archives. Estate archives, in simple terms, are protected records, papers, and private materials linked to royal history and family decisions. The key made the transfer physical. It made it intimate. It made it irreversible. William closed his hand around it, but he did not smile. He promised Charles the estate would never be used for revenge. That promise would soon matter more than either man expected, because what had begun behind closed doors could not remain there. And once the public saw the shape of the decision, the monarchy had to defend the meaning of its own bloodline. For days, the palace had controlled the silence. Then the silence broke. What had been whispered in corridors became a national spectacle before breakfast. The estate decision was no longer a private wound inside the royal family. It was a public symbol, printed in black letters, debated on morning television, and carried by crowds who understood one thing immediately. William had been raised, and Camilla had been left outside. Camilla saw the front page before Charles entered the room. The newspaper showed William walking into a royal estate office and Camilla leaving through a separate palace entrance, and the split image felt cruel because it made private rejection look official. A royal estate office, in plain words, is the place where trusted staff manage property, records, and legacy decisions tied to the monarchy. That mattered because the photograph told the public what palace language tried to soften. Power had moved. The headline struck harder than any palace statement. The Queen's legacy passes to William. Camilla folded the newspaper slowly, but the Queen consort could not fold away the humiliation. Charles had not arrived yet, and she used that absence to leave before he could see her face. The king would understand why she walked out, but understanding would not undo the wound. The world now had a picture, and pictures rarely leave room for mercy. William watched the morning broadcast in silence. The presenter called him the keeper of Elizabeth's final trust, and the phrase visibly unsettled the prince because it turned private duty into public expectation. A broadcaster, in simple terms, is the television voice shaping how millions understand a story. That mattered because William was no longer carrying a hidden responsibility. He was being measured by the nation against the Queen's name. A crowd gathered outside Buckingham Palace, not wild, not angry, but solemnly fixed on the gates. Buckingham Palace, in plain words, is the monarch's central London residence and one of the strongest public symbols of royal authority. One woman held a small picture of the late Queen against her chest, and that single gesture captured the public mood better than any expert panel. People were not only watching a family dispute, they were watching a transfer of trust. The palace response came with careful restraint. It confirmed William's stewardship while refusing to discuss Camilla's reduced role, and that silence sharpened every interpretation. Charles had tried to control the wound, but the wound had become a national verdict. By the time the headlines faded, the verdict was no longer in the hands of courtiers, because the deepest consequence had already settled inside the family itself. In the end, this was not a story about a frozen-out queen consort, a newly empowered prince, or a king forced into an impossible corner. It was about what the monarchy chooses to protect when love, loyalty, memory, and power collide. Charles made a decision that wounded his household. William accepted a burden he never asked to carry. Camilla learned that proximity to the crown is not the same as possession of its trust. Charles received the final confirmation without relief. He sat alone after the palace fully implemented William's stewardship, knowing the decision could no longer be softened, delayed, or quietly reversed. Stewardship, in simple words, means being trusted to guard and manage something important on behalf of its history and future. That mattered because the Queen's estate was not only a collection of private assets. It carried memory, authority, family duty, and the late monarch's final influence over those who came after her. Camilla accepted the new reality in silence. The Queen consort understood that Charles had not erased her from his life, but he had placed the Queen's legacy beyond her reach. That distinction was painful, because it left her close enough to witness the power shift, but too far away to touch it. The monarchy had chosen continuity through bloodline, memory, and inherited duty. It had chosen the old line of trust over marital comfort, and Camilla knew that choice would follow her into every room. William held the estate key without triumph. The prince placed it inside a locked drawer, and that simple gesture said more than any speech could have said. He would not parade the inheritance. He would guard it. An estate key, in plain terms, is a symbol of access to private records, rooms, and decisions tied to royal legacy. For William, it was not a prize. It was a promise. Charles understood then that the cost had been real, but so had the necessity. The king had preserved the institution while damaging the peace of his private life. Camilla had lost influence, but she had also learned the limit of influence near the crown. William had gained authority, but he had accepted restraint as the price of trust. The final verdict was clear. This was the moment William became not just the future king, but the living custodian of Elizabeth's unfinished promise. The monarchy survived the rupture because Charles chose duty, William chose restraint, and Camilla was forced to accept that the crown's deepest trust cannot be claimed. It must be inherited, protected, and earned. And with that, the palace doors closed on one chapter of royal influence, while the Queen's estate passed into the hands of the man now expected to carry her legacy without breaking it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and and we will see you in next one.